-8 degrees Celsius. The wind howled across the snow-covered fields, a relentless force swallowing every sound. But wait, do you hear it? Faint cries piercing through the icy silence, tiny, desperate whimpers near the old barn. Who could abandon 6 helpless black puppies in this unforgiving cold? Their tiny bodies shiver under the weight of fresh snow. Their voices call out, but will help come in time. The biting, cold wind howled across the desolate fields of Ely, Minnesota, sweeping waves of snow against the weathered walls of Clara's old farmhouse. At 68 years old, Clara had grown accustomed to the quiet solitude of her life. 5 years had passed since her husband, John, had succumbed to a sudden illness, leaving her alone to navigate the long, harsh winters that blanketed her rural home in icy silence. Her children, now with families of their own, lived far away, their visits becoming fewer with each passing year. Clara often filled her days with the simple, repetitive tasks that came with maintaining her modest property. The old barn needed attention. The garden beds required clearing even in the cold months, and the daily upkeep of her farmhouse provided structure to her otherwise empty days. Yet no amount of work could fill the growing void that gnawed at her heart during these cold, endless winters. On one particularly frigid morning, Clara bundled herself in her thickest coat, wrapped a scarf snugly around her neck, and pulled on her sturdy boots. The radio had warned of an impending snowstorm, and Clara wanted to check the barn for any tools or equipment she might need before the worst of the weather hit. She stepped out into the biting air, the crunch of her boots against the frozen ground, the only sound accompanying her. As she approached the barn, the swirling snow made visibility difficult. The wind bit at her face, making her eyes water. Then, just as she reached the creaking wooden door, she paused. A faint, high-pitched whimper cut through the gusts of wind. At first, she thought her ears were deceiving her. She stood still, straining to hear above the storm. There it was again, a series of desperate, plaintive cries. Clara's heart quickened as she followed the sound. Near the barn's entrance, barely visible against the white expanse of snow, she spotted them, 6 tiny black puppies, huddled together in a pitiful clump, their small bodies trembling violently in the icy air. Their jet-black fur was coated with snowflakes, and their wide, terrified eyes looked up at her as if pleading for help. For a moment, Clara felt frozen, not from the cold, but from the shock of seeing such vulnerable creatures abandoned in this merciless weather. They couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 weeks old, far too young to survive on their own. Their cries were soft but urgent, little puffs of breath visible in the freezing air. Without hesitation, Clara knelt down, pulling off her scarf to create a makeshift bundle. Carefully, she began lifting the puppies one by one, tucking them gently into her coat for warmth. They squirmed slightly, their tiny paws pressing against her chest as if they sensed they were finally safe. Once she had all 6 securely cradled, she wrapped her arms around them and rose to her feet. The trek back to the house felt longer than usual, the weight of her new charges adding urgency to each step. As she stepped through the door, the warmth of the farmhouse enveloped her. Clara quickly set about creating a safe space for the puppies. She laid an old blanket near the hearth and gently placed the trembling pups onto it, one by one. Sitting by the fire, Clara watched as the puppies began to settle, their cries softening as the heat of the room seeped into their tiny bodies. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost, a sense of purpose, a reason to act beyond mere survival. Looking at the helpless little creatures before her, Clara made a silent vow she would not let them face the cold alone again. The warmth of the farmhouse was a stark contrast to the freezing winds outside, but the 6 tiny black puppies were still trembling, their little bodies exhausted from the cold. Clara worked quickly, her hands steady despite the weight of worry pressing on her. She retrieved an old cardboard box from the pantry, lined it with soft towels, and placed the puppies gently inside. They huddled together, their cries softening as the heat of the nearby fireplace began to seep into their tiny frames. As she sat beside them, Clara's heart ached. Their shivering slowly subsided, but they were so small, so fragile. She had no idea how long they had been out in the snow. Clara examined each one carefully and realized that none of them looked old enough to eat solid food. Panic flickered through her mind. How could she feed them? What did they even need at this tender age? She stood up quickly, her mind landing on one person who could help. Walter. Walter, her neighbor a half-mile down the road, had retired years ago after a long career as a veterinarian. Clara had always admired his calm expertise with animals. If anyone could guide her through this, it was him. Clara grabbed the phone and dialed Walter's number. After a few rings, his warm, familiar voice answered. "Walter, I need your help," Clara began, her voice laced with urgency. She described the situation, the abandoned puppies, their fragile state, and her concern for their survival. Walter didn't hesitate. "Clara, you'll need to get some milk replacer, but for now, use goat's milk if you have it. Mix it with a bit of warm water to mimic their mother's milk. Do you have a syringe or dropper?" Clara nodded, though she knew Walter couldn't see her. "Yes, I think I have one in the kitchen." "Good," Walter said reassuringly. "Feed them slowly, one at a time. Keep them close to the fire, but don't let them overheat. I'll come by as soon as the storm clears to check on them." Relief washed over Clara as she hung up the phone, but it was short-lived. As she prepared the milk mixture and rummaged for a syringe, the wind outside grew louder, battering against the farmhouse walls. Snow began to fall more heavily, swirling in chaotic patterns through the window panes. The radio crackled in the background with an urgent weather report. The blizzard was arriving faster and stronger than expected. By the time Clara had finished feeding the puppies, a slow and careful process that tested her patience and steady hands, the storm was in full force. The howling wind shook the farmhouse, and the windows rattled ominously. Snow piled high against the doors, sealing her inside. Soon the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness, except for the soft, flickering glow of the fireplace. Clara moved quickly to light a few candles, her breath visible in the frigid air. She piled more wood into the stove, knowing it would be her only source of heat for the foreseeable future. As the storm raged on, the puppies lay nestled in their box, their tiny bodies finally still, exhausted but safe for the moment. Clara sat on the floor beside them, pulling a heavy quilt over her shoulders. Outside, the blizzard showed no signs of relenting. The house creaked under the weight of the storm, but Clara's resolve was unwavering. She glanced down at the sleeping puppies, their soft whimpers barely audible over the wind. "We'll get through this," she whispered, more to herself than to them. Though she didn't know how long the storm would last, Clara was determined. For the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of purpose, a reason to fight against the long, harsh winter that had defined so much of her solitude. The blizzard showed no mercy, raging outside for days. The farmhouse creaked under the pressure of relentless winds, and snow piled high against the windows, turning the world outside into an unbroken expanse of white. Clara, however, barely noticed the storm, as her focus narrowed entirely on the 6 tiny lives that now depended on her. The puppies quickly became the center of her world. Every few hours, she repeated the careful process Walter had taught her, warming the goat's milk, gently feeding each pup with a syringe, and ensuring their tiny bellies were full. The smallest one, barely able to hold its head up, was the most fragile. Clara decided to call him Pip. His timid whimpers tugged at her heart, and she often found herself holding him a little longer, wrapping her hands around his tiny body for warmth and comfort. As the days passed, the personalities of the puppies began to shine through, each one a spark of life amidst the cold. Max, the largest, was the leader of the pack. Even at his young age he showed boldness and energy, often trying to climb over his siblings or explore the edges of the blanket Clara had laid for them. Daisy, by contrast, was the gentlest. She seemed happiest, nestled close to Clara, her wide, trusting eyes following Clara's every move. Rusty was a troublemaker from the start, always squirming out of the box or tugging at the corners of the blanket with his tiny teeth. Clara couldn't help but laugh at his antics, despite the extra work he caused. Shadow, with his sleek black coat and quiet demeanor, was the observer of the group. He seemed content to watch the chaos from a safe distance, his sharp little eyes always alert. Luna had an insatiable curiosity. She was the first to investigate any new object Clara brought into the room and often led the others into playful tumbles. And then there was Pip, the smallest and shyest of the six. He rarely strayed from Clara's side, his fragile body and soft whimpers earning him the most attention and care. Each pup seemed to fill a different space in Clara's heart, their unique traits a source of constant discovery. She marveled at how quickly they seemed to trust her, their tiny tails wagging weakly whenever she approached. As Clara cared for the puppies, memories from years past came rushing back, nights spent cradling her own children when they were sick, the sound of their laughter echoing through the farmhouse, the weight of their small bodies as they fell asleep in her arms. She hadn't realized how much she missed those moments until now. Sitting by the fire with the puppies nestled around her, Clara felt a warmth that went beyond the crackling flames. For the first time in years, her house no longer felt empty. The silence that had once been a constant reminder of loss was now filled with the soft sounds of life, gentle whimpers, playful yips, and the tiny patter of paws against the floor. Despite the storm's fury outside, Clara found herself smiling more often than she had in years. The puppies had given her days a sense of rhythm and purpose. Feeding, cleaning, and comforting them brought a spark of joy she hadn't realized she was missing. They depended on her, and in return they gave her the one thing she thought she had lost forever, the feeling of being needed, of being loved. As the third day of the storm dawned, Clara sat by the fire, wrapped in a quilt, with Pip curled up in her lap. The other puppies lay sprawled around her, their tiny bodies finally still after a morning of tumbling and playing. Clara's heart swelled as she looked at them, her fingers gently stroking Pip's soft fur. "You've given me more than I could ever give you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. Outside, the storm howled on, but inside, Clara had found a sanctuary, a small, warm world built on trust, love, and the quiet bond between a woman and the 6 little lives she had saved. When the blizzard finally subsided, the world outside Clara's farmhouse emerged as a transformed landscape. The snowdrifts were so high they nearly reached the windows, and the barn looked as though it had been swallowed by the frozen earth. The pale winter sun offered little warmth, but to Clara it was a welcome sight after days of relentless wind and darkness. Inside the farmhouse the puppies were thriving. Their small cries had been replaced with the soft sounds of contentment, and their movements were more lively with each passing day. Clara felt a pang of pride as she watched Max tug at a corner of the blanket while Luna chased his tail in a playful circle. Daisy stayed close to her feet, as usual, while Pip snuggled in the box, watching the activity from a safe distance. A knock at the door startled Clara from her thoughts. She opened it to find Walter standing there, bundled in a thick coat and scarf, his cheeks red from the cold. His truck was parked nearby, half buried in the snow he had ploughed to reach her. "Good morning, Clara," he greeted her warmly. "I thought I'd come check on our little survivors." Clara smiled and stepped aside to let him in. "Come in, Walter. They're doing much better, thanks to you." Walter knelt by the fireplace, his experienced hands carefully inspecting each puppy. He examined their eyes, ears, and paws, murmuring words of reassurance as he worked. The puppies squirmed and yipped, but seemed to trust him instinctively. Once his inspection was complete, he prepared small doses of vaccines and administered them with practiced ease. "They're strong little ones," Walter said, standing up and stretching his back. "You've done a remarkable job keeping them alive through the storm. But Clara, these pups will need homes soon. They're growing fast, and 6 dogs are a lot for anyone to handle." Clara nodded, her heart heavy at the thought. "I've been thinking about that. I want to make sure they go to families who will love them." Walter smiled. "That's the right idea. We'll start looking once they're big enough. In the meantime, I'll help you get the right food for them. Goat's milk is fine for now, but they'll need more solid nutrition soon." As Walter packed up his supplies, he paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Clara, I should tell you, there's been talk in town about someone abandoning animals in the area. A couple of weeks ago, a dog was found tied to a tree near the forest, and now this. Have you noticed anything strange?" Clara frowned, her mind flashing back to the faint trail of footprints she had seen near the barn when she first found the puppies. "I did see footprints," she admitted. "They led to the barn, but there was no one there." Walter's brows knit together. "It's possible whoever abandoned these pups thought your property would be a safe place for them. Or maybe they were just trying to avoid getting caught. Either way, it's cruel." The thought filled Clara with a mix of anger and sadness. How could anyone leave such helpless creatures to fend for themselves in the cold? She looked over at the puppies, who were now piling on top of one another in a playful heap, oblivious to the conversation. "I won't let them suffer again," Clara said firmly. "Whoever did this, whatever their reason, it doesn't matter now. These pups deserve better." Walter nodded, his face softening. "You're doing a good thing, Clara. I'll ask around, see if anyone knows anything. In the meantime, let me know if you need anything else." After Walter left, Clara stood by the window, watching as his truck disappeared down the snowy road. The puppies were safe for now, but her thoughts lingered on the mysterious footprints and the unknown person who had left them behind. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. As the puppies tumbled and played at her feet, Clara resolved to give them the best start in life. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them, just as she had faced the storm. These 6 little lives had come into her world by chance, but they had already become her responsibility, and she wouldn't let them down. As the puppies grew stronger and more independent, Clara knew the time had come to find homes for each of them. It wasn't a decision she made lightly. These 6 little lives had become her world, filling the once empty farmhouse with laughter and purpose. But Clara also understood that she couldn't keep them all. They needed loving families who could give them the attention and care they deserved. Clara reached out to her small community, asking Walter and a few trusted neighbors to help spread the word. She made it clear that she wouldn't let the puppies go to just anyone. Each family would need to prove they could provide a safe and nurturing environment. It was a matter of responsibility and love, a commitment Clara took as seriously as the storm that had brought the puppies to her. Max, the largest and most adventurous of the litter, was the first to find his family. A young couple, avid hikers and outdoor enthusiasts, immediately fell in love with his boundless energy and curiosity. When they visited Clara's farmhouse, Max ran straight to them, wagging his tail with enthusiasm. The couple laughed as he tugged on their shoelaces and barked playfully. Clara knew he had found his perfect match. "Take care of him," she said as they left, her voice steady though her heart ached. "He's a brave one." Daisy, the gentlest of the pups, found her home with an elderly woman named Martha. Martha lived alone in a small cottage on the outskirts of town and had recently lost her beloved dog of 15 years. When she met Daisy, the connection was instant. Daisy curled up at Martha's feet and stayed there, her soft eyes filled with trust. "She's a comfort," Martha said softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. Clara felt a bittersweet pride as she watched them leave together, knowing Daisy had found a quiet and loving home. Rusty, the mischievous troublemaker, was next. He had a knack for finding ways to escape the box, chew on furniture, or tip over his water bowl. A young boy named Henry, full of energy and just as mischievous, seemed like Rusty's perfect companion. The moment they met, Rusty barked excitedly and bounded into Henry's arms. Clara smiled as Henry's laughter filled the room. "He'll keep you busy," Clara said with a chuckle, handing Rusty over to the delighted boy. Shadow, the calm observer, was adopted by a retired professor named Arthur. Arthur lived a solitary life surrounded by books and cherished the peace of his quiet home. Shadow, with his thoughtful demeanor, seemed perfectly suited for such an environment. When Arthur sat on Clara's couch, Shadow quietly climbed into his lap, as if claiming his place. "You've found a thinker," Arthur remarked with a gentle smile. Clara nodded, grateful for the professor's understanding nature. Luna, ever the explorer, captured the hearts of a family with a curious and imaginative daughter named Lily. When Lily visited Clara's home, Luna followed her everywhere, sniffing at her backpack and pawing gently at her coat. The two were inseparable by the time the visit ended. Clara watched as Luna wagged her tail, clearly excited about her new adventure. "She'll fit right in," Clara assured the family as they left, Luna happily bouncing at their heels. Pip, the smallest and most timid of the puppies, was the last to find his home. A teenage girl named Emily, struggling with anxiety, came to visit at her mother's insistence. At first, Emily was hesitant, but Pip, sensing her unease, quietly approached and rested his tiny paw on her knee. The connection was immediate. Clara watched as Emily's face softened and her hands gently cradled Pip. "He's just like me," Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Clara felt a lump in her throat as she handed Pip over, knowing he would bring comfort and healing to Emily's life. One by one the puppies left, each departure a mix of joy and sadness. Clara felt her heart swell with pride, knowing she had given them the best start possible. Yet, as the farmhouse grew quieter with each goodbye, the emptiness returned, echoing through the rooms that had once been filled with tiny paw prints and playful barks. On the final day, as she stood at the door watching Pip and Emily drive away, Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, reminding herself that this was what she had worked for, what the puppies deserved. She had saved them, and now they were bringing happiness to others. Sitting by the fireplace that evening, Clara let herself smile through the tears. The farmhouse was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence, a hopeful one. The puppies had left behind more than chewed slippers and muddy paw prints. They had left Clara with a renewed sense of purpose, and the knowledge that even in the harshest winters, love could grow. The farmhouse was quiet again, and the silence, though familiar, felt heavier than before. Clara missed the tiny barks, the clumsy tumbles, and the warm little bodies that had filled her days and given her a renewed sense of purpose. But as the days turned into weeks, she knew she couldn't let herself slip back into the solitude that had defined her life before the puppies. Sitting by the fire one evening, Clara thought back to how caring for the puppies had awakened something within her, a drive, a sense of responsibility, and a connection to the world around her. She decided she wouldn't let that feeling fade. The next morning, Clara bundled up in her thick coat and headed into town. The local animal shelter, a modest building at the edge of Ely, had always been a place she'd driven past without much thought. This time, she pulled into the gravel lot and walked inside. The air smelled faintly of hay and fur, and the sound of barking greeted her as she stepped through the door. A young woman at the front desk greeted her warmly. "Welcome! How can I help you?" "I'd like to volunteer," Clara said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I don't have much experience, but I've cared for animals before." The woman, whose name tag read Sarah, smiled. We're always looking for volunteers. Experience isn't as important as compassion. Before long, Clara was introduced to the shelter's routines, feeding the animals, cleaning their spaces, and spending time with them to help them feel loved and socialized. She found herself drawn to the older dogs, the ones who had been at the shelter the longest and needed extra patience. One day, while sitting with a timid senior dog named Buddy, Clara felt a familiar warmth in her heart. She realized she wasn't just helping the animals, they were helping her too. Volunteering at the shelter became a new rhythm in Clara's life, but it wasn't the only change she made. Encouraged by Sarah, she decided to step out of her comfort zone even further. Clara joined a local book club, something she had always wanted to do but never had the courage to try. The group met at the town library every other week, a cozy gathering of neighbors who shared tea, laughter, and discussions about their favorite stories. At first, Clara felt out of place among the group, but as the weeks passed, she began to feel at home. She reconnected with a few old friends she hadn't seen in years and even made new ones. They admired her stories of rescuing the puppies, and her determination to keep moving forward inspired them. Clara also started to rediscover her passions. She picked up knitting again, creating blankets and sweaters for the animals at the shelter. She began taking walks around her property, marveling at the beauty of the changing seasons, and even joined a gardening group to prepare for spring planting. Each activity brought a sense of community and purpose that she hadn't felt in years. As the weeks turned into months, Clara reflected on how much her life had changed. The puppies had been a catalyst, pulling her out of her grief and solitude and showing her that she still had so much to give and to receive. The farmhouse no longer felt like a lonely place. It was now a sanctuary filled with memories, a hub from which she could step out into the world and connect with others. One evening, as Clara sat by the fire knitting a blanket for Buddy, she smiled to herself. The puppies had gone, but their impact on her life remained. Through them, she had found a new path, one that was filled with compassion, connection, and growth. The silence of the farmhouse, once so heavy, now felt peaceful. Clara had learned that even in the depths of winter, when life seems at its stillest, new beginnings are always possible. The world outside Clara's farmhouse began to thaw as spring arrived. The snow, once a heavy blanket of white, retreated slowly, revealing patches of green grass and budding wildflowers. The air, crisp and clear, carried the gentle hum of life, returning to the land. Clara embraced the change with open arms, feeling a warmth within her that mirrored the season's transformation. The long, harsh winter was behind her, but the lessons it brought remained. Clara felt lighter, her days no longer weighed down by loneliness. Instead, she filled her time with simple joys. She tended to her garden, turning the soil and planting vibrant flowers whose colors she could already envision bursting into bloom. The act of nurturing life gave her a sense of fulfillment, a continuation of the purpose she had rediscovered during the storm. One sunny afternoon, as Clara knelt by the flower beds, she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. She looked up to see her daughter Emily stepping out of the car, a wide smile on her face. Behind her, Lily, Clara's young granddaughter, bounded toward her with arms outstretched. "Grandma!" Lily cried, throwing herself into Clara's embrace. Clara laughed, holding Lily tightly. "Oh, my sweet girl, you've grown so much." Emily joined them, her eyes soft with affection as she watched the reunion. "We thought we'd surprise you, Mum," she said. "It's been too long." Clara led them inside, the farmhouse now a warm and welcoming space. Over tea and cookies they caught up on life's happenings. Emily listened intently as Clara shared her experiences from the winter, the puppies, the blizzard, and her new role at the animal shelter. "I'm proud of you, Mum," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've done so much for those animals. You've always had the biggest heart." As they talked, Lily wandered around the house, stopping by a blanket Clara had knitted. "Grandma," she began hesitantly, "do you think we could get a dog, like the ones you saved?" Clara's heart swelled at the question. She knelt down to Lily's level and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Well, sweetheart," she said with a smile, "maybe we'll find the perfect pup for your family someday. It takes a lot of love and care, but I think you're ready for it." Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement, and Emily nodded, silently agreeing that a new addition to their family might be just what they needed. As the days grew warmer, Clara continued to embrace the renewal of life around her. She planted rows of daisies and tulips, the vibrant blooms serving as a reminder of the beauty that follows even the harshest winters. She spent afternoons at the animal shelter, where Buddy, the senior dog, had become her faithful companion during her shifts. Clara often thought about the puppies. She received updates from their new families, pictures of Max on hiking trails, Daisy snuggled up in her cozy new home, and Pip resting quietly beside Emily's lap as she read a book. These updates filled Clara with joy, knowing that each of the 6 little lives she had saved had found love and belonging. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Clara sat on her porch with a cup of tea. The scent of fresh flowers wafted through the air, and the gentle chirping of birds provided a soothing soundtrack. She thought back to the storm, to the moment she had first seen the tiny, trembling puppies in the snow. It had been a moment of desperation, but it had also been a turning point. From that moment on, Clara's life had shifted, her days filled with purpose and her heart filled with love. Clara smiled to herself as she watched the last light fade from the sky. Winter, with all its challenges, had given way to spring, a season of growth and possibility. The memories of the puppies, her time at the shelter, and the bonds she had rekindled with family and friends reminded her that even in the coldest times, love and compassion could light the way. And as she sat there, surrounded by the blooming flowers of her labor, Clara knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one filled with hope, resilience, and the promise of brighter days ahead. As Clara sat on her porch, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across her blooming garden. She clasped her hands together, closing her eyes as a gentle breeze brushed her face. In a soft voice she prayed, "Dear Lord, thank you for guiding me through the storm and filling my life with purpose once more. Please watch over the families who have welcomed these little souls into their hearts. Bless them with love, joy, and strength, just as you have blessed me." She opened her eyes, feeling a deep sense of peace, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The vibrant flowers swayed gently in the spring breeze, a testament to the renewal and hope that faith had brought into her life. Now, Clara turns to you. How has faith or love helped you through life's storms? Share your reflections in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep these uplifting stories alive. Together, let's spread hope and gratitude for the blessings we've received.